Benjamin, Deric, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. We're excited to get the chance to speak with you. Obviously, the work on Salvation or Bust, and then the latest episode, Paging Dr. Song. But you guys have been a team for quite a while. Deric, can you tell us how that all started?
You mean our we call it our geek feast at this point in time. We've told this story many times. And I mean, it all started one fateful day at a comic book shop.
Very cool.
It was at a comic book shop here in Studio City. I was a big fan of a comic book called Planetary. And I was by Warren Ellis and John Cassaday. And John Cassaday was one of my favorite artists at the time, still is. And at that point in time, the book had been running about 6 months late. And I was a writer's assistant on a sci-fi show called Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. And the writer's room was right down the street. So every Wednesday I'd go down to the comic book shop, pick up my books. The Planetary was never there. Finally, had read online what it was, and I raced down there to pick it up, and it still wasn't there. And so then I started cursing out the artists. I was like, these lazy artists, they're never on time. They are always playing video games, because there was a reputation for some artists during that time period where they were whenever books were late, it was always sort of like the artists that were at fault. And particularly, like, there were some big artists that kind of had poor habits, or just habits that distracted them from, delivering books on time and stuff. So
Right.
in my knowledge as a fanboy, I was 100% certain that John Cassaday was one of them. So meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, Ben is quietly perusing the aisles, and he's not saying anything, that he's working on his own internal dialogue, and I'll let Ben pick it up from there.
So at the time, I was writing comics freelance, right? My career started at Marvel. I was assistant editor on the X-Men books for 2.5 years. I was Marvel's first online editor. And then in 1997, I went freelance. And a couple of years later, my wife and I moved out here to Los Angeles. And, every Wednesday I'd go pick up my books like everybody else. And, I wouldn't say like the launch of my career was that, super well received. Like, there's a lot of people who had negative thoughts about the books I was writing. So, I kind of kept a low profile in the shops, didn't really want to engage the fanboys and be told how terrible job I'm doing. I'm like, all right, that's my policy. Don't engage. Then I hear this one fanboy, ripping into John Cassaday about him being so lazy and not doing any books and all that stuff. And I'm like, God, do I say anything? And I was like, yeah, I got to say something. I'm like, hey, man, I know for a fact that the reason why the book that you're crying about is late is because it's not because of John. It's because, Warren hasn't turned in the script in 6 months. And he's like, well, how do you know? I'm like, well, because John was one of the groomsmen at my wedding. So that was the beginning of this beautiful friendship that has lasted, over 20 years. And the start of our partnership was over, little fanboy squabble in a comic book shop.
Well, it was even not even so much that. It was just where he was like, he introduced himself, because I'm like, oh, how do you know this? And he goes, well, I'm Ben Raab. And I'm like, that name sounds so familiar. And he, as I always say, that Ben never did like, you should know who I am. He was just introducing himself. But I was like, and then the comic books were, oh, Ben Raab, he wrote X-Men, Excalibur, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and I was like, man, I always thought you were just older and grayer and like looking nothing like a rock star that you look like. I didn't know that comic book writers could look like you. And it blew my mind. And so when he found out what I was doing for a living, he was looking to make that transition from comics into television and film. So he wanted to pick my brain. So we started we met over lunch a week later and found it that we had so many things in common right down to our birthdays being 3 days apart. It was just slowly, we just started collaborating on ideas. And then my boss at the time, and one of our dear friends now, Robert Wolf, who was the showrunner of Andromeda, he said, when you guys are ready, come in and, pitch some ideas, and I might be able to give you an episode to write. And because Robert came from the school of Roddenberry, being in Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, so it was like he's always like very much in the belief of like paying it forward and coming from doing 26 episodes of a show, there's always like room there were a couple episodes that always, for freelancers and stuff. So we whipped up ideas, and we were determined to like land one. We were like, we're going to write an episode in Andromeda. This is going to kickstart our adventure, our career in this world. The day that we go in, Robert gets fired from the show. And now we're just like, what do we do now? And we're like, okay, well, if we're going to be serious about this, then we should do all the things that it's going to take in order to break into this business. And the first thing is you need to have a writing sample. And so our first writing sample is, in the case of Write What You Know, we wrote a Smallville. And that landed got ourselves our first manager. And then we wrote an Alias, and that got us our first agent. And then from there, we were just off the races of just trying to break into television. And it took us 8 years. It was
a long slog. Like every year we'd submit to the writing programs, we'd get rejected. We'd write other specs. We did a CSI, we did a Nip Tuck. We'd always find ways to sort of drop our little bit of geek into all of them. Like our CSI spec this is when the Star Trek Experience was still in Las Vegas. The B story was Death on the Transporter.
That's fantastic.
Nice. So just a little nod right there to what we loved, and figure, write what you know and write what you love. So that's what we did. And but then we wrote a Rescue Me spec, and that was the thing that was the script that really got opened a lot of doors. I mean, it got us staffing meetings, even on Smallville, believe it or not, which we didn't get. We went through that twice. We got close, but didn't quite get over that hump. And then we were on year 8 of what was supposed to be a 5-year plan for me. And my wife and I had this understanding that it was going to be 5 years, and I was on year 8. And I was like, listen, it's got to be now or never. Like, I don't have a plan B. So what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? I don't know. But that one script got in the hands of Erica Kinnair, who was heading up the NBC Writers on the Verge program, which was the one program we'd never submitted to. And she's like, I really think you guys should submit. And so we did, and we got in. And ironically, that's the year we also got into Warner Brothers and CBS. But like, we decided to go with NBC, and 5 weeks into that program, we were staffed on Warehouse 13. That was our first TV job.
Nice. That's fascinating. I love that. Just the meet cute, for lack of a better word, in the comic book shop, and leading to all of this. Can you tell us a little bit about that process over those 8 years, and you're writing these spec scripts, you're writing, these samples. What's it feel like to kind of write something with the knowledge that it may never be produced, but you're just simply trying to get eyes on it and get, in essence, eyes on you? Like, because I think that that's something that a lot of people don't experience, quite frankly. So Ben, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's practice, right? I think one of the reasons why people maybe responded negatively to my early comics work is because I was doing my creative growth in public, in print. And maybe a little bit more incubation time would have been better before I decided to step out into that world. Obviously everything worked out, so I don't look back with regret, but it's just like, but that specking process it's you teaching yourself and learning how to write in the voice of someone else, right? In the voice of a show that exists, because ultimately when you get on staff, that's what you're going to do. You're not going to be this creative auteur who's going to set the tone of the show unless you are the showrunner. Otherwise, you have to write in a way that showrunner says it's going to match every other episode that we do, which is going to be written by someone else who's also trying to match that voice of the show. So I think that's the inherent value in specking and doing it for no other reason than to have it as a sample, which is going to, again, get you representation, which is then going to get you meetings, which is then going to get your foot in the door.
You mentioned Smallville, and it's funny because I was recently kind of going through a rewatch of the show, and it is always very interesting to me that the episodes tend to stand out when they don't have that voice. Alternatively, something that's fascinating to me is when episodes stand out because they kind of move the ball forward a little bit. And I think especially it's hard when you're trying to produce like 24 episodes in a season to do that. Like, it's easy to get static and get comfortable a little bit. you know, because with Quantum Leap specifically, I think that the ball has been moving pretty quickly, and it's been wonderful to see that happen. But having worked on some other shows, you know, like Warehouse 13 and The Flash and Arrow, that obviously I think tried to have that serialized storytelling, but there were certainly periods of those shows when I feel like that comfortability level got reached as well, and things might have been a little bit more static. So I'm very interested in what the challenges are to not only write in that voice, right, but then also kind of keep the characters evolving and moving forward as opposed to things staying static. And is there a balance you have to strike between the two?
I mean, I think so.
Oh,
I think you absolutely have.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. You're. I mean, yes, absolutely. You have to have a balance. I think that where people don't understand, and sometimes fail to understand, is that when you're building out a show in a first season, there's a lot of trials and tribulations and figuring it out, and a lot of times you'll have the big idea at the beginning of the season, and this is where the character is going to go in the journey. But then there are so many other factors that come along of like, as you're breaking the stories and you're figuring out like, oh, you know what, that big idea that we had, it's not such a big idea. Maybe we like this way here, we like this person here doing this. And then the other thing is like, as you're, the show is moving along, it's like, oh, that character, that actor that we brought in, they're not the strongest person, so maybe we shouldn't build an entire story around that character, And so it's like, and then the studios and the networks, they have their idea of what a show is. So it's a constant sort of very much sort of it's always, it's shifting sands, right? And the thing is though, like a good showrunner, a good leader will have a plan, but completely understand that you got to throw that plan out. You got to throw it out. It's like, and you have to change it. But as long as everybody else understands that, then you make that pivot. It's like what tends to happen sometimes is like when nobody has an idea, and then you can feel it as you're watching the show. Like, man, like this doesn't feel like anybody has any idea like what the show's about or where it's going or what. And so, and even intuitively as a viewer, you might not be able to pinpoint it, but something's off, something's wrong, right? And also just like the inverse of that of like, when something is like firing on all cylinders, you're like, yes, this is all working, and that's the excitement for it being in a writer's room with writers. We're especially on a first season show when we're just really sort of just like creating the mythology and really sort of being able to like play with things and say like, okay, wouldn't it be cool to do this? And then in a show with Quantum Leap where every episode is just a different genre, different story, and you're able to basically play in such a a vast sandbox, which is like is really fun. It is where shows where you're just sort of on rails and like this is what the character is. This is the character who's a hero and he's got to save the city every week. That sort of thing, right? And so yeah, I think that where it is like, just to get back to the whole thing of like, I think for us, what's exciting about it is it's like every time you're in the room, it's like what can we have? What's the next thing that Ben is going to leap into? And what is the story and emotional journey that's going to connect and resonate with all the characters and connect with the audiences and stuff like that, right? So it's a lot of it's fun when it works. And we've been very fortunate, of being on a show where it's working,
Absolutely.
And you can see that again, like by your enthusiasm, other fans. And at the end of the day, it's like we just want to have fun, and I think that comes across.
I completely agree. And one of the things that I feel like, speaking of things that are really working, is that with both of your scripts, with Salvation or Bust and Paging Dr. Song, I feel like have been wonderful showcases for the relationship between Ben and Addison. Not that obviously it hasn't been written strongly throughout the course of the season, but if I had to pick a couple of episodes that really showcase that relationship well, I think those two would be pretty high on the list. Fellow Travelers, I think, does a wonderful job as well. So Ben, talk a little bit about not only the importance of that relationship, but just maybe how, you as a writer view that relationship, and further how the actors have helped to, formulate maybe your opinions and kind of the way that you craft a story around them.
I think we've gotten very lucky in that the 2 episodes we've done have come after major emotional turning points in their story, so that we get to sort of play with the aftermath reactions to it. Like, that's like, it's one thing to, some writers really like to get like, oh cool, I get to do that moment, right? And it's like, I like to do the moment after the moment.
Absolutely.
Because then you can sort of talk about it, and you get to sort of see what it means to them. I mean, in 5, one of the things that was really exciting was being able to have the moment where now they know, right? First 4 episodes don't know who they are to each other, and now they know. And to your other question about the relationship between the actors, Caitlin came up with the great ad lib of this whole cowboy thing working for me, which
nice.
it was like manna from heaven. What a great idea! What a great button for that scene to have, and Ray's response to it was just wonderful. It's like, now we get to have fun with them. Now we get to see them start to be a couple again. Yeah. And what we spent 4 episodes sort of withholding, now we're living in it, and so that's going to affect everything that comes after. So that was really exciting. And then in 10, what was cool was knowing that the stakes of what's weighing on him, right? The stakes of, I left to save you. And then he finds himself in a situation where 3 lives are on the line, and it's just sort of bubbling in his subconscious, right? And it's like the stress of everything he's going through over the day in the hospital culminate in that moment in the back of the ambulance where they're sitting there and they're talking about the fact that, he came pretty close to not succeeding this time. This was a little bit of a nail biter. What if that happens when it's time to save you? Like, what if I choke? And her confidence in, first of all, I don't need you to save me, but also I know you will be there when I need you. It's just so, because Ray and Caitlin have such great personal chemistry as people and are so wonderful to each other as actors, it just makes our job so easy when we sit down to write, because we know that anything warm or loving or emotional we give them, they're just gonna knock it out of the park every time.
Yeah, I think
they really they really care. That makes all the difference when you have actors that care about their characters and really understand and rooting for their characters. And they bring it every single time. That makes a difference right there. Versus someone coming in and phoning it in. It's like, what do I got to do? All right, sure. It's like you never want that, because then you're like, well, then are we doing our job correctly, and properly here? So, that if anything, there's just been, through the leadership of Martin and Dean, that, has really sort of like been able to bring the room together and really, and truly understand like what the mission is. Here it is. Like, this is the story of Ben Tong and Addison, this love story, right? And how is Ben going to get home? But in the sacrifices that he's willing to make to save the person that he loves, right? And then and again, Caitlin and Ray, Mason, it's like Ernie, Marissa, they all understand. They come in and they step in and they bring their A game every single time. It's just wonderful to be a part of that. So shout out to them and thanks.
Yeah. I mean, they make the show certainly a joy to watch, just as much as writers, producers, and directors, which is obviously key. That goes without saying. So many questions have popped into my head, but one thing I'll point out real quick is that recently Ernie mentioned in an interview that Quantum Leap is the most fun that he has ever had working on a show. hearing something
Oh,
like
that's
that, I'm
nice.
just curious. Yeah, how does that make you feel? Like, I mean, Deric, you can go ahead and take that one first. Like when you hear Ernie say
I
something like
mean,
that,
well,
you know.
I'm on first. It's Ernie Hudson, my dudes. You know, it's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's a wonder that I haven't showed up on set with a proton pack. You know, like saying, "Hey, how's it going?" You know,
Yeah,
does
man.
busting still make you feel good? You know, it's like, you know, it's very surreal to be, you know, in his presence, and because he is just so he's just Ernie cool, right? And it's just very when he's dialed in and he's doing a scene, you're just like, wow, that's Ernie Hudson,
Yeah.
you know. So it's fun, but then also again, he also cares about magic, and you know, and that's what's fun about magic is again, it's tied into the, you know, that original series in that way of like really that connective tissue that we get to have the constant presence of. And so, you know, and really as we get to, you know, sort of peel back the layers of his character and stuff, going forward, you know, we're going to try, you know, do even more interesting things and stuff. So, yeah, I for myself, it's pure delight every time he steps on. It's like, you know, I gotta gag about it. Let's not lose it, you know.
um, yeah, I mean, as soon as I read that, I just thought like that's got to feel so cool. And Deric, you also mentioned, you know, Martin and Dean as showrunners and kind of, you know, really kind of like pulling everything together. And I think that one of the things in our conversations with Dean that has become increasingly apparent, and is obviously apparent, you know, speaking even right now with the pair of you, is that the sense of collaboration on this show feels so high. And I mean, obviously you've got to have that to create, you know, anything like this, right? But there's
Yeah.
just, and maybe it's because I'm more tuned into this, you know, obviously than I have been with other shows, but it does feel a little special, you know, just as somebody who's completely on the outside looking in. Ben, does it feel that way to you sometimes? And especially as a team, coming in as a team of, you know, the pair of you as a team, being now part of this bigger team, did you feel like prepared for that?
Well, I mean, you know, this is our seventh show, sixth, seventh, I forget what it is, but like, you know, we part of the reason we wanted to work in television is because it is a team sport, and it starts in our own dynamic as a pair that it's always better when you have someone to work with because you may have a great idea and then that other person makes it better, right?
Mm.
And that's kind of how it is in a writer's room. And this is one of the best rooms we've been in. And we've been fortunate to be in a lot of really, you know, work with a lot of really great people. And you know, on balance, like it just feels like this team is firing on all cylinders constantly. So that's a nice, rewarding feeling to feel like everyone really contributes. Everyone's got something different to offer and bring to the table, and you know, you're constantly learning. Right? As writers, we are always evolving. We're always changing. We're always growing. And you know, the people that are on the staff have certainly, I feel like, helped me grow a lot as a writer, helped me grow as a person. Like it's you know, you don't often get that experience. Sometimes, you know, you hear horror stories about rooms, you hear about toxic rooms, and you know, yeah, we've been in all kinds of rooms, but without question, you know, this one has been a pleasure from day one, and it continues to be a pleasure. And you know, I think what starts in the room is reflected on the set, is reflected on the screen. And there's a reason why we're getting a second season, right? It's because everyone is rowing in the same direction, and thankfully the studio and network are very happy with what we're doing, and the audiences are connecting with it as well, and that's, you know, nothing more gratifying than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know obviously we've definitely connected. Deric, how important to you is that sense of collaboration? You know, I think, you know, Ben obviously hit the nail on the head, but, you know, for you, you know, feeling that, you know, how has that been on the show?
Oh, I mean, look, it's like collaborating is something that has always been a part of my life, and in everything that I've done, like sports, you know, in the military, and just having, like I was saying, like, you know, having this brunch that I put together, you know, with the friends and stuff that I do every Sunday. So and then with, you know, it's also like with writing teams, it's like Ben and I, we've been writing together like 20 years plus years now and stuff. And every time we sit down and write, it's exciting. And then, so then when you step into a room and you work with like-minded people that have, interesting ideas and perspectives, and again, like as Ben says, like when a team is put together, that everybody brings something different, but then is able to make a cohesive show, that's where the fun really begins to happen. It's like just, I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, no matter like the stress, because it's like making television is not easy. All right, it's not. It's not. It's like we're, right now we're on set. Not right this minute, but all last week and going into next week we're on set with the cast and crew, and it's like it's a bit of, as I call it, controlled chaos, because it's like in its nature there are a million things that can go wrong at any given moment, right? And you're always just wondering, like, where's that other shoe going to drop and stuff like that. But again, it's like, but when you have a great foundation, and in this case, a great home base of like starting in the writer's room, and again, with Martin and Dean, really everybody sort of like saying, like, again, as Ben pointed out, rowing in the same direction. I said at the end of the day, and no matter how much stress that it might put on you, I can still have a smile on my face that, I'm getting paid to do this for, do this as a living. It's like, and it's just like, and having fun, and then also seeing the results, right? Of like our episode just aired. Was it last week? I'm on pandemic time. I don't know. Is this 2024? What is it? Like,
It's
I was like,
still
every
2020
time
in my mind.
listen, I feel like that I've leaped every morning. Wake up, like, am I still in the same my body? Like, who am I? So yeah, last week, and that was like, we shot that back in early November, late October, early November, man.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so to like, it moves at breakneck speed, and then but you see the end result, that comes out, and you're just like, this is what we, this is why it's so fun to just do this, and really be able to share these stories, and then actually, it's like, it's so rewarding when people do come up and say, like, I really enjoyed this episode. This, this moment, really touched me, or, inspired me, and stuff like that. Because sometimes when we are just in our own little bubble of like, we're wondering, like, is this working? Are we doing the right thing? Like, and so when it pays off, and it pays off in a big way, it's like, okay, cool. We kind of know what we're doing here. Let's keep it going, It's like,
yeah.
So very grateful for that, I'm grateful for the fans that it just, have continued to grow and embrace it, and really liking what we're putting out there. So and there's going to be a lot of cool episodes coming up that, I don't think fans are ready for it.
I, based off of what little I know, I would say that's certainly true. And I'm really looking forward to it. We had a question, and unfortunately, if you noticed me, if you're watching this on screen and not just listening, I was just looking around for a second. I've misplaced my phone, so I can't get to my Discord right now. So I just want to throw out an apology to the person that asked this question, because it's a great question, and I think it fits perfectly in our conversation right now to ask it. But we did have one of our listeners. They were curious about in that collaboration that occurs, how much of the writing, are the individual writers actually taking on for the episode, and how much are, the showrunners maybe inserting or creating certain narrative ideas to kind of move that overall plot forward especially when it comes to like the stuff that's happening at the project, versus how much of that is just, you guys go off, you write your script, and it is what it is. And maybe there's obviously some rewriting, some tweaking here and there to get things moving in the right direction. Because it sounds to me based off of what we heard, that the writers' room, kind of being that cohesive, and even my mind was kind of blown that you guys are doing it through Zoom, because I just pictured you all literally in a room, like working together. Because again, there's something about the energy of the show that almost lends itself to that sense of kind of like intimacy of being physically present with one another. I don't know if that makes any sense, but anyway, so I'm curious, what is that balance like as far as, what Martin and Dean might be inserting, especially with those project scenes, versus what you're just writing on your own? Ben?
Well, most of the time when we start an episode, we have general areas, like the A story, which is the leap, right? We have general areas that we want to maybe cover, and that's sort of the adventure, obviously, of the week. The B story being sort of the thread of our mythology. Usually, Martin and Dean will have some sense of, here's what I want to accomplish with that, or here's, where I want it to go. Or if we've pitched something that's sort of been standing for a while, and then they go, you know what, based on where we really are now, let's tweak that. That'll happen, right? So, the individual writers, look, we're all always pitching on all of the things, right? So you never know. A writer may pitch an idea that Martin and Dean go, yes, that's going to be the B story of this episode, and this is what we're going to do. The minutia and the details of it, they may, fine tune, or someone may throw it out there and they hold on to it and say, okay, I liked what so-and-so said 3 episodes ago. We're going to put it in this episode, and this is where it feels like it makes sense in our larger story arc. So before a writer goes off the script, they kind of know everything they're supposed to do. There are situations where a note comes in on the next episode that then affects the episode that you're currently writing, and therefore you now have to change the beast. So you see what I'm saying? So it's like, it is a constantly evolving beast until the cameras roll, and even then sometimes. But we are all involved at it in various degrees. Ultimately, obviously, Martin and Dean are the final say on that, and whether or not they'll give it to us to sort of do the rewrite, or just take it themselves just to get it done quickly because they've got it in their heads and they know how to address the concern. Studio Network, they'll do it that way. So I wouldn't say there's one set way it happens, but it is like Derek said, it is this controlled chaos that is, constantly evolving.
Yeah, that's fascinating, just because, again, I think that sense of collaboration has got to be so key to being able to, to keep producing something then that fits in line with everything else, that feels cohesive, and going back to what you said earlier, has that same voice. Right. Which I Dennis, feel free to jump in here, but I certainly feel like over the course of these 10 episodes, everyone feels like who they are. Do you know what I mean? Like, if anything, they've only grown. There's nothing that's ever really, rung false for me. And I love seeing those characters grow. Speaking of characters, I'd be remiss if I just didn't ask this, but guys, seriously, where was Ian? Like, what's
I knew you were going to ask that. I was waiting for that question. They were in the episode. They were in 2 scenes, which unfortunately had to be cut for time, and thankfully didn't disrupt the narrative of the B story.
Yeah,
but we shot those scenes with Mason. They were there. It was, we get it. We know. The same way.
I will say, to a credit, when we watched the screener, I did not notice it at first. Like, that's how much I enjoyed the episode. And my wife Betsy was the one who had to point it out that Mason didn't appear at all. I was like, oh wow, it was a really good episode. If I didn't notice.
That's the funny thing. Is that it's like sometimes you don't know what you're missing. You literally and it's amazing. Like, even when we watch the cuts, it's like I had that moment of, oh wait a minute, where are they? It's like, oh right, I know why we did this.
Sure. So I have a question. Jump back. You said like the pitches that you make and like they may be picked up by Dean and Martin, or maybe they're not. This may be an unfair question. Have you made a pitch that both Martin and Dean, they've come back and said, thank you, but that is way too out there. We are not going to use that ever. And they've given you the idea, like, so you're never going to use that ever. Can you share that with us now? Like a pitch that you made that is never going to be used?
I think. I don't think there's ever been one that we pitched that's like so out there that this is not the show and we're never going to do it. It's just like, I don't like it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. I think that if anything, there was just like, early on, maybe that was actually it was Salvation or Bust, right? I mean, prior to that, we were working on a different idea, and because of the time and where they wanted to go in the story, it was like, oh, you know what, we're going to do this instead, and it's like because we have access to the Western sets here on the lots, and we think we can come up with something really really cool and fun here. And so then we were like, cool, let's do this. And then and that's how Salvation of Bust really sort of like came about, was because it was another story idea that got jettisoned. And then it's like, okay, because of budget, restraints and time, and it was just sort of like, and the story wasn't quite, gelling the way it needed to be, especially it being into the fifth episode of the season, and it's like, okay, we need something with a bit more bang for its buck, and so that's where it comes about. So if anything, I think like there's ideas always being tossed out at the beginning, or even like, okay, what's the next episode we want to do, and like that, and you'll come up with a laundry list of ideas, and then you present them, and then so it'll be something that will spark or will spark, and then that spark, and you're like, all right, moving on. There's never any sort of like hurt feelings or, oh man, I can't believe that happened, right? It's like, because again, everybody understands the assignment. And it's like, you're here to tell the best stories possible, and we serve at the pleasure of the president, right? It's like, how are we going to, how are we, what is the best story wins? And that's where I think it's like with Ben and I, as a team, we've always had that agreement and understanding of like best idea wins. And so you check your ego at the door, right? So when you come into the writer's room and every writer is coming in pitching ideas and stuff like that, it's like you're here to help one another. So you might come up with that idea that you're like, oh, wow, I really wish I could write that. But then someone else is going to write it. And you're like, you know what? It's here for the show. We're here for the show, right? And how are we going to push that rock up there and stuff? So I don't think, even when it's a bad idea, sometimes when a bad idea, a good conversation happens. So it might be like, hey, all right, so that story point is not there, but the character idea, like what Ben's going through, that's interesting. Let's talk about that. And then it evolves into like, well, okay, can we take that emotional moment and put it into this story idea? And then you get a happy sort of combination, the combo platter, as you call it, right? So yeah, I don't, the idea of like there's no such thing as a bad idea. Oh yes, there is. Yes, there is. But it's like, again, it's like, but understanding that's the process. It's like sometimes from a bad idea comes a really good idea, a good story. So
well, and to what Deric was saying before, like the original version of what 5 was going to be, there were 3 elements of it that are in 3 other episodes. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but like again, it was a question of now is not the time to tell that story for those particular kinds of stories. But they went into the bank. They were held until it was such time to turn them into something else. And those 3 things are coming. So cool stuff.
Speaking of stuff that's coming, you mentioned earlier that there were scenes with Ian originally in paging Dr. Song, and you guys might not necessarily be able to answer this question. I know it's something that we asked Dean earlier, but any idea, any plans or thought that they might be see the light of day someday, or is that just something that like, no, it's done, it's over with, there's not going to be special features, there's not going to be anything like that? Is it anything that you would even necessarily want to be out there, or do you think it might muddy the waters?
I think in 110 situation, I think that there was enough that carries over into subsequent episodes, where you're not going to miss what we originally had in 110, because it's going to play out in a much bigger way. That you'll be able to actually, because what ended up happening is that you run out of time, right? You have so much space, and you have your A story, your B story, your C story, and then you want to tie them together. And then, you have these scenes that you think like, okay, that's going to help it. But then, like you said, like, but then we got to cut it for time. It's like, okay, but that story, that kernel, that idea, that scene in that moment with the character, the being, it's like, okay, we'll carry over into the next episode, and then we'll be able to, play it out there, or the episode after that, in a way that's like will pay off in a much bigger, more interesting way, so that you feel like that you didn't really waste anyone's time. And so that's I think that's where it's like, so there's nothing I would say shocking or revelatory that was cut from there. Otherwise, I think that's the other thing was like, if it was important, we would have found a way to keep it in, right? And so the fact that there isn't there, then it's like, all right, there's a reason for it. So yeah, there's nothing earth shattering of like, hey, wait for the director's cut,
Sure.
wait for the director's cut to come out, and then, oh man, only we would have put that in there.
Right. Don't touch my Lord of the Rings extended editions.
Right, exactly.
Do you find that you have to compartmentalize a little bit as far as, because serving as writers and producers, are there times when something, like with an instance like that, that, by the time an episode is locked, that you're just sort of like, okay, hands off and I'm fine with this? Or do you still maybe even have, and not necessarily with this situation with the scenes with Ian, but just in general, are there times when you as a writer kind of say like, oh, I want more time, or I want more of this? Or do you have a way of, again, sort of compartmentalizing it so that you're, the producer brain kind of takes over and says, this is the job, this is done, this is good, that's the way it goes? Ben?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, I as a human being, as a writer, have the inability to look back at anything I've done and go, I couldn't make this better. Like, I could always make something better. I should have done this. Why didn't I do that? Oh my God, I hate myself. I've got to give up the career to solve. Sure, that happens daily.
He does that 5 minutes after. He does that 5 minutes after he sends a script. He like sends a scene to me, and then he's like, "Oh wait, don't read that one. Read this one." So 20 years of this. 20 plus years of this.
But once a cut is locked, that's it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, look, that's the decision that Martin and Dean have made that call, and I respect them, and I respect their choices. And so, at that point, I'm just like, well, I can't wait to see how it's all gonna, once it's all prettied up and the color's done and the music's in and all that stuff. Like, now I'm like, great, can't wait for that. Can't wait for the airing.
Yeah. One of the things that both Salvation or Bust and Paging Dr. Song have in common is the element that Ben is there to save, more than just like a person, more than just one life. How much of that is intentional, for you guys as writers?
I mean, it increases the stakes. It complicates matters. Narratively, it's a good foundation. It doesn't diminish, like, oh, there's one life you have to save in this episode. That doesn't at all. It's just,
of course,
it just, it adds a level of pressure. I mean, Deric and I we're genre writers. We like action. We like adventure. We like, sci-fi and westerns and all stuff. And so the fact that we got to sort of, like, we infuse whatever we write with those elements. That's where, I think we do our best work knowing that it's, like, even the medical episode was kind of, in our minds, an action episode, right? There's a ticking clock. There's the sense that, there's a ticking clock in all the episodes, obviously, but, like, imminently, like, people have been hurt, they're going to die, and if you don't save them, you're trapped here forever. That was sort of the, the stakes of it. And, it just makes it harder for him to do what he does.
Yeah, one of the things that certainly stood out to me is that, especially being 10 episodes deep now, it felt very much, this pressure cooker that Ben is under, and it really helped to show the cumulative effects of the previous 9 leaps, which I thought was really well done. I'm not going to disagree that there was that action, like, kind of element with you being on the ticking clock. However, it's funny because as you were talking about genre television and science fiction and adventure and action, all that sort of stuff, one of the things that I find pretty remarkable about this episode, and I think Dennis and I both felt the same way, is how moving the episode is and how it really plays to the strengths of the genre of kind of like a hospital drama in particular. Did that feel a little intimidating for you? Did it feel out of your wheelhouse at all, or did it, or was it something that you just kind of felt like, oh, we got this?
It was a challenge because that is not in our wheelhouse. For medical, like for when we say like, hey, you're gonna write a medical drama story, like, wait, who, us?
Yeah.
That's that. If there's anything that we are not known for, I guess it would be that. And it's just sort of, but once we understood like what the story was and like how to play it out and stuff like that. Again, it's just like for us, we really enjoy like the character drama, emotional, moments that we can really just sort of like squeeze out in this case for Ben having to trying to save 3 lives. And then also it's like, so when we're when you come up the story in the room, and in this case it was sort of like the room was really pushing the story, so that by the time that we got involved, because we were working on we were working on another what was the
We
Salvation
were
Bus,
producing
right?
105 while the room
producing
was
105.
Sure.
10.
And so the Friday that we finished production, Martin's like, you guys are gonna write 10. We're like, we weren't part of 10.
What? And so it really is like, where you have to sort of like, okay, you have to step into it and like, okay, figure out like, okay, how are we going to basically approach this now that the room has come up with the idea and all that, but now we got to figure out like, okay, how are we going to write this, how are we going to put this together and stuff. And then it was like, all right, time to watch some ER, time to watch this, and just really sort of like get back into like, okay, what are medical dramas and how do they play out and all the fun and stuff. And then, what are the tropes and the fun moments, and then the sort of like, again, the emotional moments that are really going to, that need to land and stuff. So it's a fun challenge. It's like we're never one to back away from a challenge, and we ended up surprising ourselves. And it was like, and Dean and Martin were very complimentary in that way of like, they were like, hey, you guys did a really good job. And Dean even said like, you guys haven't been, weren't writing medical dramas, you should really think about it. We're like, no. And like, we'll do it one time. And, we'll do it this time and stuff. So, and then again, we this is real quick. Sorry, just to, for it to all come together. Having such a wonderful director with Tessa, is just like she came in, and then being able to cast Tiffany Smith and Eugene Bird, who are friends of ours, and they again they brought their game and just really helped elevate it in a way that was just like, it just became such a fun episode to work on. We had a lot, it was a blast. And I'm really happy that it came together the way it did.
It's funny you mentioned Tiffany. I mentioned this, I think, on our social media, but I didn't recognize her at first from the production photos. And when we saw those promo photos, I didn't look at the credits. Like, I just kind of clicked through them real quick, just to be like, oh, okay, this is what's coming up. And then when I went back and I realized, I was just sort of like, oh, I know her, because I used to, with like DC Daily, and DC, so all that sort of stuff. Like, I was sort of like, oh yeah, I know who that is. So I was really excited to see her in the episode, and I think the guest cast overall was just so strong, and I think that going back talking about some of those emotional and moving moments, Francois Chow, I think in particular, just like,
oh my God,
so incredible.
Stan Shaw. I mean, there was like those two, they're like legends in this business, right?
Yeah. It stays from Chicago, which is awesome. Always exciting for me whenever I see that somebody's from Chicago. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
But I, again, being that it is kind of out of your wheelhouse when it comes to crafting some of those more emotional moments, those moving moments, one of the things that I'll often say, and quite frankly, I could just be talking out of my rear on this because I don't necessarily know how to identify it, but is sometimes there's this fine line between what feels like audience manipulation, and it's like you're just trying to extract this emotion from the audience as opposed to kind of tell that story and have a truthful, honest moment happen. And clearly a lot of that can kind of rest on the actor's shoulders. But as writers, I'm curious, how do you get away from it? Because for me, and I think from what we've seen of the response to the episode, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and I did not feel that way at all. So I'm just curious if that's something that you're aware of at all, if it's something that I just made up, and how you kind of get those moments to feel authentic and natural, as opposed to just like, we want to make them cry. Ben?
Yeah, I don't think we ever set out to do that. That was never, goal. That was like, well, if that happens, that's great. Like it's a medical drama. Someone's going to cry. But at the same time, like, and I don't mean to, I don't think we always or often think about the audience while we're writing the story. We're thinking about the characters in the world they're inhabiting and making sure that every moment is earned. And I think that's what audiences respond to. They respond to the feeling of, I'm not being manipulated. I've watched this unfold in such a way that this moment that's happening right now, that's tugging at my heartstrings, of course this is where it's going to go. Or it's surprising and I didn't expect it to go this way, and now I'm gutted because of it. Like, yeah. I think, I mean, maybe some writers do set out to, I'm going to make them cry. Maybe they've got that sort of agenda when they sit down to write. But for us, it's, what are we going to put Ben through that is going to be powerful and speak to his character the most and influence his journey the most and force him to, in the wake of those moments, take action accordingly in the context of that journey and that leap. And again, if people are touched by it, I think that is just an added side, bonus for us.
That's great. I love that answer. When it comes to verisimilitude, and certainly with the hospital episode and that not necessarily being in your wheelhouse, how important was it to you to be able to get that stuff right? And were there moments when maybe it was an obstacle and you thought, no, we're just going to tell the story, and if this isn't 100% right, that's okay?
We tried really hard to get it right. Like, I consulted a buddy of mine who's a doctor. We had a medical consultant on set. We went through the script line by line to make sure what we are saying is the correct way to say it, and that if a scene wouldn't play out a certain way, it wouldn't stage a certain way, we adjusted it so that it would. Again,
right.
Some liberties.
It wasn't Ben's song saying like, it's something medical. Right? give me 20 cc's of Gatorade. Like, what? What type of doctor are you?
I'm not a doctor.
Well, that was one of the most charming lines of the episode, is when Ben says, that he's not going to be a doctor for much longer. That's a great moment. Yeah. Well, hey, for someone who has absolutely no medical experience whatsoever, it rang true to me. So, but it is something that I think that as you kind of evolve these genres and you go through, there are things that come up. And I mean, Derek, you mentioned the military earlier. I mean, obviously, like, that's something that comes into play here in this episode, and certainly Caitlin has her experience, which is documented. But with that particular scene, especially, which I do think was one of the most moving scenes, and I know Ben, you pointed out on social media that Dean helped a bit with that. But I'm curious, that it's just such a standout moment, and I'd really love to know where that came from, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it just came from just understanding, who Caitlin is first and foremost, like her military background and her sort of her passion and continued support of veterans, right? And also just wanting to sort of like land on that they're multidimensional. It's like what happens with a lot of soldiers, with what they go through, what they experience, the pain, the trauma. That's all very real and needs to be recognized. And myself, as being being a former Marine, I was fortunate enough where I wasn't actually, I never got caught in Desert Storm, but I had a lot of friends that went through Desert Storm. I missed it by a couple of weeks. I was very fortunate where I didn't have to go through that. But I have a lot of friends that suffered that, and then I have other friends that since then that have gone through the Afghanistan, and so it's like you never just want it to be sort of an afterthought, and so I think that's where it just sort of started from. Like, okay, and what better way for Caitlin for her character to connect with Addison, to connect with Ben in this moment, to really sort of understand like the lot, the sacrifices that you have to, the sacrifice pledges that you have to do sometimes, and how to deal with trauma and so that that's where the conversation sort of came from. It was just more about that. Okay, if we're going to do this, let's do this right? And I think that's always sort of being very, very protective of that, because you want to be respectful of that, right? And it's just in a way of like, again, you never want to just sort of like just gloss over something like that, especially subject material like that in that case. So I think that's where it was like I'm very always just very cognizant of that, and whenever you're talking about anything in the military, regarding the magic with Addison, and so I'm just always sort of like trying to keep my radar and make sure that that you do it, that you do it as right and as well as possible, and never making it a detriment or something that is something that should be embarrassing or harmful in these ways, because these are real life experiences. I mean, people that go through these things, and so you want to make sure that you get that you see, recognize, you hear you, and acknowledge that. And so that's where I think it just comes from a place of just. But for me, for a position of just respecting and always wanting to make sure that try to bring to light moments like that. That's when you have opportunity to do that. So that's where Ben and I, we had a conversation of like, okay, what's going on, what's going through their head and stuff. And then again, for Dean to come in and say like, okay, this is how I'm gonna bring it home, do this. And and again, but also doing it in a way where it's not going to overshadow like what is the purpose of this scene, right? It's like, okay, that's the other thing. It's like it's not becoming a PSA or a moment about that. Sure. It still has to service the story. It still has to service the characters in that moment. And that's the tightrope that you have to walk. You never want to feel like that you're lecturing somebody or lecturing an audience. I think that's it is. Yeah.
And listen, also like what made that from that scene into the music montage of Ben, the MOS scene of him delivering the news and Francois' reaction. Like, credit to our editor for putting together an amazing sequence. To our music supervisor for putting an amazing choice of song that really just like really just drove it home. Like and our actors and their performances. So it's just kind of it was a brilliant sequence that I think, again, team effort, right?
Yeah. One of the things too, you mentioned the scene afterwards when Ben goes into the room. Was there ever any hesitation on your guys' part? Did you ever write anything for Ben to say, like, have some sort of okay, yeah,
that was always a silent MOS scene. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a beautiful choice. We talked about it last week on our overview of the episode, and I just think it was very effective.
I'm pretty sure we the stage direction was like, and here's where the needle drop goes.
Nice,
right?
Yeah.
I always want to see the scripts, especially for moments like those. Like it's like how did what did they write that with? Because having seen a few here and there, it's just sort of like how does everybody craft those moments? With again, you've got an awesome cast, you've got an awesome guest cast, you've got great writers to work with, great producers to work with. You mentioned editors, you mentioned music supervisors. When it comes to the production crew and it comes to like creating these worlds, week in and week out, because it's something that Dennis and I, when we did our overview of the classic series over the past few years, we talk a lot about costumes and the sets, etc. Like, I mean, it's got to feel pretty cool to be able to like walk on set and see these worlds realized week in and week out, as opposed to it being the same set every week. Not that that's not cool, I'd imagine, but to be able to to have that continual like shift. There's a lot of people that have got to work really, really hard, I imagine, to make that happen.
Oh yes. Yeah. I mean, especially like with Salvation or Bust. I mean, it's like, I don't know if you ever been on the Universal lot and you've gone through the Western town. It's, it's these sets that have been standing for like over 100 years, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
the last time that they did any sort of spruce up of it actually was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. They actually came in and they had to reinforce some of the sets and everything. But so when we were just doing just the tech scout and the scouting of it and looking at it, it was like these old abandoned, just wooden sets. And then our art team, the set deck team, they all come in and they transform it, and then they bring in the truckloads of dirt. It's like, I mean, just massive amounts of dirt, and you create these, the roads, and you step in there, and also you feel like that you are stepping back in time in that way. It's like you feel like a moment of Marty McFly stepping in the Hill Valley. Right? It's just sort of like you're looking, you're like, holy crap, this feels like a Western, and all of a sudden, and then you have all the costumes and everybody walking around in the period pieces and stuff like that. It's just like, now you're just like, okay, we're in it. This is great. And then it's the same thing that happened with Paging Dr. Song. We used an abandoned hospital out in Hoffman. It was a creepy abandoned hospital out there in Hoffman. And like apparently one guy had said that when they went in the early scout, they were walking down a hall, this dark hallway, and as they went down the hall, a door closed by itself. And he was like, nope. Like, turned around. Like, and so, but when they step in and also they transform it it feels like a hospital. I mean, it's just like, and you have, patients walking and bustling and activity. It feels like you're like, holy crap, we're in a hospital. This is crazy, And it's just like in a matter of days. And so, yes, I mean, massive credit to, the production crew of like what they have to do. Every 8 days, you're making another movie, basically. Like I said, it's like, and yeah, we do have, we have standing sets with the headquarters and the conference room and all that stuff. But yeah, when we're out, or when they have to build these other sets and stuff like that, man, they move at breakneck speed. Because because this is not like in streaming where you're like, maybe you might have like a year in advance to like build things and shoot everything, and it's like here it's like every 8 days, boom, we're moving on. We're moving on to another episode, and and it's like in completely different settings. Like, okay, here we're gonna be in the 70s, like in the boxing ring. Here, this is gonna be this. We're gonna have this, be here in a big, in a grand hall for these, these country western singers. And you just gotta. So they're always like looking for locations, and and again, it's just sort of like that machine. It's just like when it's humming, it's just like stand out of the way. And it's like. And so it's like we, our heavy lifting is like, yeah, we got the script and everything. Here you go. But then when you watch it start to come to life, and every department is like thinking about, okay, how to do this, and how we're gonna make this, and how we're gonna make this on time. And it's amazing anything gets made. That's what we're just sort of.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at this season alone, and it's like you've got a space shuttle, you've got an old Western town, you've got a hospital. We know there's a battleship coming up. Like, it's like there's so much like just big stuff too, and it's the type of stuff that I feel like the classic series couldn't necessarily always accomplish. Speaking of which,
the spooky Exorcist episode directed by Chris Grismer, Grismer being our producing director. I mean, it's just like, again, of like the cohesiveness and the understanding of like how every director that comes in, they know the assignment of like, okay, we gotta deliver onto this episode, but then they're able to put their own sort of like flair and touches to it and stuff in that way. But again, it's like it's all sort of a singular piece. It's astonishing, like, again, of like how the directors that have been able to come in, and because they also on a huge learning curve. It's like, you got 2 weeks. 2 weeks you coming in that those 2 weeks of like the prep time, working, and then you're shooting the episode. and it's like we will hit the ground running or not. That's it. It's a sink or swim scenario every single time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's definitely been swim more often than not thus far, which is awesome to see as a viewer. One of the questions I usually ask earlier than this, but I am curious. Ben, I'll start with you. How familiar were you with the original series?
And full disclosure, like the show came out when I was in college. I wasn't watching a lot of TV. I had an awareness of it. I mean, again, being a sci-fi fan, of course I knew anything that was on network. We only had network television, a little bit of cable, but like, I was aware of it. I maybe watched a few episodes here and there, but I was nowhere near as well versed in it as like Deric was, for example.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't like must-see TV for me at that point. It just, I was like, oh, this is a cool, fun show. But, I didn't even, I don't know if I even had a TV, in where I was. You know what I mean? So it's like, it was a lot of time spent in front of television in college.
And now you work in television.
Well, I watched a lot before and I watched a lot after. So those 4 years were it was a little dodgy,
Deric, what about you? What was your experience with the original series?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, come on, like, look, this is my back of my phone.
Nice.
Nice.
It's like I lived and breathed that show. It was like I loved every minute of it, and then also the shout out and just so much fun to actually be able to work with Deborah Pratt. It's like who has been carrying the torch and just really sort of like it's like such an honor to be to continue the legacy of that show. It's like it was impactful. It was impactful for me because in a way of like where the first time I saw that show, I was almost dying. I was in the hospital.
Oh no!
Because my appendix had burst, and I was in the military at that point in time. But I remember I was laying on a gurney, and Quantum Leap was on, and I was like, "What is this show?" And I better not die because I need to keep watching the show. And it was. It was great. I mean, Dean Stockwell, Scott Bakula, and then just like the chemistry with it, and the fun, and the result through the fun of and that was the other thing that was so much fun for us of like, for Salvation of Bus, of introducing the evil Leaper. I mean, come on, now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Leaper X, right? It was just like this is what's so what's like so great. Being able to tap into the mythology and honor that, and then again with magic. I mean, that what was it? Leap Home Part 2, right? It's just like so. It's like one of my favorite episodes.
Same here.
That's so yeah. I just love being able to now just be a part of it and just being able to build on that. It's so much fun and great. Yeah, I watched every episode. Although it was very weird because like when we first were approached and considering it, and just talking with Ben was like, "I ain't never seen the show." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, what
I didn't see it,
I was like,
Getting a new writing partner now. That's
I was doing the the Lindsay Wagner meme with the equations,
Yes.
popping up, and that's what I was like. I was looking at Ben. I was like, okay. And then and then we met with Brian and Steven, and then we were just like, oh, we have to be a part of this because we really didn't at first. We were coming off of Legacy, and we were like, okay, we're gonna take some time off, and then soon as we were like, we need to be on this show. This is it. And so and it was a little heartbreaking to know that because the passing of Dean Stockwell, like how what could have been without Carolyn.
So I think
fun way, but
yeah. So I think so far, like you are like out of the writing team and the producers, like you were like a genuine like hardcore fan of the original series. So I have to ask, in the eventuality you are able to get Scott Bakula come back onto the show, how hard are you going to fight to call dibs on getting to write for Sam, considering that you are a true OG fan?
I think there might be a little bit of a rumble, even if it's on Zoom. It's like
He's frozen.
No.
I mean,
that's what you get for asking a question like that, Dennis.
Oh no.
I think he just leaped.
Yeah, Derek, you just leaped. You froze for a minute there, but the timing was quite perfect.
No, it would be, that would be very cool. Science hazy, ask again later type of scenario. What I welcome the challenge. But what's I will say that it's like, yes, we talked about that early on, we talked about that, but at the same time, I think what's been really great and what's been really fun is like being able to push the show forward, right? It's all about what's going, how do you take that show that that is so beloved, but also respect that, but then also understand and really sort of like laying the path of like, this is the show now. Right, and it's like, while we have the things that are connected to the original series, this is truly Ben Song's story, and this is the story of Ben Song and his leaps, and this team and this family, right, and what's going on, so that if there is a situation where an opportunity may arise, it's like, I think that all of us understand that it's like, okay, how is that going to be organically played in that doesn't, again, overshadow like what we built, what we created and stuff. So I think that that'll be a fun conversation to have. But right now, I think it's just like, we got to land the plane of like this first season with Ben Song, right? Like, let's keep getting this right, before they talk about a season 5 possibility.
For sure.
I mean, I will say, as someone who wasn't a diehard fan of the original, and wasn't as familiar as everybody else, it's for me, it's like joining the staff of Next Generation, right? Like Star Trek Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're inhabiting the world of the original series, but you are forging a new path, a new 5-year mission. Like, it's that to me is what was really exciting about this show, is that it wasn't, oh, we're just going to reconceive it completely and make it modern. It's no, we're tying to something established and foundational and beloved, and getting to inhabit a new generation of that same idea. So I thought that's something that I thought was a really smart thing. And also just, shifting the dynamic of the leaper and the hologram, making it something more intimate. Like, it's just, it's those things that, it's like, it's baked, it's the same DNA as OG Quantum Leap. It's just with a different angle, and I think that's something that makes for a lot of rich storytelling for us, where you can go, okay, we know that there's an audience that's showing up for us because they love that original show, and we're not going to forget that, but we are going to go in different directions,
Yeah, and speaking of different directions, one of the things that the new show does so well, and I think has really found its groove for, is balancing the leaps with the scenes back at the project, and of course having that, having these scenes at the project at headquarters and seeing these characters interact outside of whatever leap bin is on has been a joy for me. I mean, I've loved it. I've loved getting to know these characters. I've talked about how, the evolution of Jen in particular has been so cool to watch, and just seeing that character grow and become, more part of the story is fantastic. But of course, one of the characters that we got to spend a lot of time with this week was Janice. And I think, you guys had the opportunity to write some pretty big stuff for her in this episode. And, without, I know you can't give anything away, but I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the character and about kind of, what she represents to the show, especially, but when you're talking about having that tie to the classic series, here's a character that couldn't exist without the ending that the classic series had. Here's a character that is tied so strongly, of course, to one of our main characters from the classic series, both of them really, when you think about it. So I would love to hear about, just how you see her fitting in to the show, and maybe a hint about where things are going. I don't know.
I don't know if we can give you that, but
hey, I had to try.
Georgina is lovely and a pleasure to work with, and her portrayal of Janice has just been sort of spot on. It's funny because we were on set for the episode we're producing right now, talking about the fact that she, as the heir to Al Calavicci's legacy, or one of the heirs to Al Calavicci's legacy, the one we've met, right? That she has a certain point of view on what this is all about and what this means and the value and the importance of this project. And as we've sort of revealed that, she was up for the project, didn't get the project, that there was some scuttling of her place in it, that, mom may have had a hand in that. Like, it's just, there's a lot going on, and the fact that she's sort of been sucked into this world, almost like at a point where maybe she was like, I'm done with it. And then here comes Ben's song asking me, pulling me back in, right? And she said in 10, she's like, I had a life, and then this has now consumed it. But she's a character who, I think values what Quantum Leap is, sees the importance of Quantum Leap, and is determined in her own way to protect Quantum Leap. Now, may not be in a way that we always agree with, right? She may have a point of view that you go, well, wait a minute, but it's always it's like this weird sort of distant cousin of our team that is trying to sustain something, even though they're not directly linked or a part of it, but has a link that my father's legacy. I don't want to see my father's legacy go away. I don't want to see anything happen to that. And if I can be of help, I'm going to be of help. And even if I know I'm right and you're all wrong, I'm still there to help.
So many questions I want to ask.
That was a good measured
answer on, so I'm not going to bother. But
he did drop that she's the one family member that we've met so far, and I'm holding on to that nugget right now. That's what I'm holding on to. Because Al, they had 3 other daughters. And there's been a lot.
I didn't watch the original, but I know that.
There's been a lot of chatter like where are the 3 other ones? And so I'm going to hang on to that.
Them at some point. I know, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier towards the beginning of the interview, and I promise that we'll wrap things up here in consideration of your time and our listeners' time, although I'm having a hell of a lot of fun. But you mentioned dropping, little tidbits into your spec scripts, little nods to certain things. In Salvation or Bust, you've got a great, sort of A-team nod with, I love it when a plan comes together. In Paging Dr. Song, Dennis and I are very curious. Was Sandra Turk's name at all a nod to Scrubs?
Maybe.
Because we loved that. But also, going back to Salvation or Bust, because we haven't talked a lot about it, but I am curious, going into a Western, again, it's got that action adventure and stuff, but it does maybe seem a little bit further away from some of the other things that you had already done, not wholesale, but, what was it like to play in that sandbox? And is writing a Western something that you'd always wanted to do? Or was it just one of those things where it's like, we're writing a Western, kind of like we're writing a hospital drama?
Well, I mean, to your earlier question about spec scripts, Derek and I wrote a Western, which is the sample that they read when we were being considered for this show.
Oh,
so
cool.
I don't know if that factored into the decision to have our episode be a Western, but no, we love that genre. I mean, it's it's something that. And what was fun about this episode was that it was a non-traditional Western, right? Like it was a Western told from a different point of view. It wasn't told from the sheriff's point of view or the I don't know, but it was the people in the margins, the people who multicultural, different, a diverse group of people who's mainstream society might have sort of looked askance at, fighting for something that they believed in, and you don't often see that in westerns.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was important.
I feel like you mentioned that, and I'd almost be remiss if I didn't bring it up, but another thing that both of your episodes have in common is the amount of representation and diversity that we've seen on screen from both of those episodes. And in one hand, I don't even really feel like asking this question, because one of the things that's lovely about it is nothing that I even thought about while watching the episode. But, with the sheriff, for instance, in Salvation or Bust, he has that lovely line about, finally coming to a place where he could, be himself, be his most authentic self. And that line has been interpreted, multiple ways, I think, by the audience. But I just love the idea that, like you said, here are these people that, were having to live on the margins for one reason or another. Now they've got a safe space where they can go. And then we see him paging Dr. Song. One of the things that, again, this was genuinely after my second watch of the episode, I had this thought pop into my head, and I mentioned to Dennis, I was like, there wasn't one white male character that spoke in this episode. And I kind of love that. And I'm just wondering how intentional that is for you guys, and how much of that is just kind of like, that's just the way it got cast. Do you have that in mind when you're writing it? Or is it because unfortunately, I feel like the cacophony of voices that we sometimes hear, even if it's a minority, is it's like, those voices will sometimes say, oh, they're writing it to be this, and, they're just trying to push this or do that. And I certainly don't feel that, or, don't see that. What I just see is, just this wonderful show that happens to be much more representative of our, world as a whole. So I am curious as to, how much of that is intentional, and how much of that, again, is that's just the way it gets cast.
Oh, I'll take it.
Oh wait, well no, I didn't know if you were going to go or not. It's like so. I will say for both episodes, actually intentional. We had those conversations, and we wanted to make sure that these characters are represented in a way. Especially, I think for Salvation or Bust, that was the whole point of, like, these are marginalized characters, people that come to this town, and this town was created for them and by them, right? And so that we wanted to create this sort of a Western town that we haven't seen on screen before, right? And characters that you necessarily wouldn't actually ever see on screen. And so that was a very important conversation for all of us, all the writers, and to make certain, and including having the right director for the episode, and so it was very much a decision early on, and then for paging Dr. Song, yes, again, it was like we wanted to have characters, we wanted to have that we normally don't have the front and center, or at least the attention that is talked about and needed. And so we're very fortunate where we a supportive studio and network, and everybody understanding, like, this is what we want to do. As far as I'm always, I gotta say, I'm a very firm believer in representation matters, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, it starts from the top. It's like you don't want to have, like, it's like if you have Ben being Korean American, his character, and then being Korean American, it's like, so you want to make sure that that there are other minority representation surrounding him. It's like he's not just the only one. He's not on an island, right? It's a character that he's playing. So there's always the conversation with, like, how we want it to be a reflection of a world. And also, but at the same time, make sure that it is representative in the right way, of not just in just like, hey, we're gonna, like, as I call it, spray on diversity. Right? It's like we're not just gonna spray this on and just call it a day. So that's where there is thought that is put behind it, and it's like, and every episode is approached that way of, like, how what is the message that we'd like to convey. And I think that's also what resonates with people, because there's an authenticity to it, right? There's not just, again, it's not just where we're here to preach or just say like, hey, this is what we slapped this on at the last minute.
Right.
And so at least that's where it starts. I think it starts in the room with just the conversation of like, okay, what characters do we want to see? Who is going to be? How is it going to? What's the makeup going to be? And stuff like that. And then that carries over into the casting. And so we might not always get it right, but when you do, it really stands out. Which is unfortunate. But again, that's very indicative and reflective of just like how. Like the Western that Ben and I wrote is about Bass Reeves, right? And up until recently, a lot of people didn't know who Bass Reeves was. Did not know that he was the first African American U.S. deputy marshal in the West, and this guy who there should have been already 10, 15, 20 movies about this and shows about this. And there's
They
not
were.
had
It was
been,
called The Lone Ranger.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so the idea of like how in doing the research of like, holy shit, yeah, there were many black cowboys in the Old West, and there were many other POC representation in the Old West, but a lot of that was just completely washed out in Hollywood. And it was like not mentioned. So when we had the opportunity to do Salvation of Us, we're like, let's bring these characters alive. Let's bring like who can we that's interesting that we never thought that would you'd see on television, much less in a prominent story. That's so. And again, that like having supportive showrunners and leaders that understand that and want to push that as well. That makes a big difference.
Yeah.
It
I mean, I
makes all
think
the difference
especially,
there. So,
I think that we've seen, from multiple outlets, unfortunately, there have been networks and studios that have, there's been stuff out there in the ecosystem. We know they're not necessarily being as supportive as they could be, that they're doing things that they frankly could do a little bit better. And to see NBC not only have a primetime program of the nature of Quantum Leap that has had so much representation and been done so strong and thoughtfully, like you said, but in addition to that, to then see the NBC account posting on social media the line that Ian had from fellow travelers about gender identity. Like, I thought that was incredible, and it had a huge impact on me. And I think that the show in general has had a very positive impact, just me on a personal level, and even going back to before it aired, because the way that that you would hear some of the dissenting voices, which again you hope is a very small number of people that just happen to have a loud voice, and again being able to kind of just talk against that, frankly, and say like, no, this is important, this is why this matters, and to see the show carry out that mission so well has been fantastic. And so it's cool to hear that is intentional and it is important. And I mean, there's no indication that wasn't the case. I just I just wanted to hear you guys say it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, one of the things that Deborah said to us, when she talked to the room was, the 4 H's of Quantum Leap, which is history, humor, heart, and hope. And that applies to everyone, across the boards, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter, what your faith, skin color, gender identity, none of that. It's those 4 things are the kinds of stories we're telling for everyone.
Yeah. I love that. I'm glad that you guys have already brought her up, because that was definitely going to be something I was going to ask about. Obviously being such massive fans of the original series, and in particular fans of hers, and think that her scripts from the original series are amongst the strongest of the entire series, time and time again. So we're thrilled that she is involved and will be directing an episode coming up too, which is just awesome. But maybe go a little further, Ben. Like, what has it been like to have her around and to to have her involved in the show?
No, she's lovely. I mean, she's Deborah's not in the room with us, but she, we see her on set, and it's just a pleasure to be around her, and as one of the foundations of this series, she comes from a time of a different Hollywood than the one we operate in. So we get to really understand her perspective of her journey as a actor, dancer, writer, producer, and she regales us with stories which are amazing. She's incredibly creative and imaginative, and like just has such love for this, and we wouldn't be here without her. So that's it's a real honor.
Yeah. Deric, what about you? Especially being such a fan of the original series.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of credit that is not given to, because like as Ben said, it comes from a different time. So it's like there was the fact that she was instrumental in coming up with a lot of the ideas and stories and character moments and stuff like that, but not given that recognition in the way that some other writers of the time were. It's like that that in itself is there's a bit of a tinge of of the frustration and tragedy of like what could have been like if she would have got her accolades and the recognition and been able to go create more shows, more more stories and ideas. Like how much more of that would have been of impact, how much more impactful that would have been. But because of the limitations and the restrictions and the prejudices, and just sort of the misogyny that exists of this business at that point in time. And it's like it's gotten better, but it's at the same time it's like one of those things where it's just like I always wonder, like you always like, wow, this is another story of what could have been. But the fact that she's still here, she's still coming up with story ideas and projects that she wants to do, and the fact that she was the one that really championed making sure that the flame never died on this show, because she loved and believed in the show as much as as much as all the fans, and really being able to interact with the fans and keep the fans it was like over the years, right? Years and years of this to finally be able to it's come to fruition again. I think it's just like such a and again, for us to be a part of it, I think it's just and wanting to do right, because she is like so passionate and really cares about it. So that's that in itself, I think it's just been a sort of like a wonderful feeling to be a part of that. I think that's really in that way. And so you just want to do right, So
if only there was a way that we could really put right what once went wrong.
I'm gonna fire up the quantum accelerator. I'll be right back.
Going forward, and I know I'm not going to ask for any specifics. I'm not trying to be cheeky here. I'm genuinely just kind of curious about what you can say, but going forward with the show and knowing one of the things that Dean kind of left us with when we talked to him, and Drew kind of intimated this a little bit when we talked to him as well, is the idea to really like push the boundaries of the show forward and to really try to go places that that just haven't been gone before. That was a weird construction, but anyway, I'm curious as to what that might represent for you guys, and what your thoughts are on really just kind of pushing the accelerator to the max. Ben, I'll start with you.
I mean, again, we won't give you any specifics, so don't even try. No, but I will say that in line with what I was saying sort of before about the like the handoff from the original series to Next Generation, and the fact that the show it's the same show with different angles. There are things coming that I don't know if the original show would have done or could have done, but we can and we will, and it's going to have a massive impact on our characters. And I think it just deepens the mythology of both shows by doing what we're going to do. I think. It's you got to take big swings, right? Like, and you got to give we all grew up watching television a certain way, and the way audiences consume television is so different now that we're by necessity it's like, what's the next level? How do you top what came before? How do you take it to another plateau? And I do feel like this season where it's going is going to do that, and it's going to do it in a way that's consistent with our series, and that's going to pay off what we've been setting up. And I believe we will have earned, as I was saying before, like, and maybe it'll make you cry. I don't know your emotional investment level, but what I mean by that is, we just, the story started a certain way. It's going to end in a certain way, and I think the audience is going to be both pleasantly surprised and have a great ride as we get there.
Well, I mean, as guys that have been doing a Quantum Leap podcast for almost 5.5 years, I'd say our investment's pretty high.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Deric, I want you to be able to have a chance to answer that question as well.
No, Ben pretty much said it as well as can be, and as safe as can be. I will say, again, starts at the top. Martin and Dean, they come up with some fun ideas, and again, like, we're just right now just in the thick of like trying to land this plan for season 1, but we're already into season 2 as well, and again, like, there's going to be some big fun things that are going to happen over the next couple episodes, like especially like next episode with Margarita, Matthew's episode that will be airing this coming Monday. It's a lot of fun, and then it's like, each episode, it just builds on it, builds and builds and builds. And again, it's like, if we've done our job right, it's going to come to like some really cool moments that I don't think people are going to be expecting and seeing and stuff. So I think that's the exciting part of like, okay, when we get there, we'll come back and talk at that point in time. But going forward, again, of like what, it's like, it is I think it's the idea of like, how do we top what we've done, but at the same time, it's like, it's not about topping it, it's about making it interesting and different, and and just again, just not losing sight of like, okay, but this is still the show, it's still the show. And I think that's, in itself, and like, and these are still the characters that you're going to care about and you're going to want to continue to live with them, right? And then, so I think that's where it's the challenge that will, rise from that. And again, it's like, I think also just like having a great engine of like the week of it does not change. That's in itself. It's like, it's like Dr. Ben song, putting right where once went wrong. That in itself is long. Do not lose sight of the fundamentals of what the show is, and then everything else you can build upon. I think that's where that's where the fun challenge that lies ahead for all of us. So, and I think we're off to a great start.
I completely agree. Dennis, did you have anything that you wanted to add or toss to them?
I mean, just to put a button on it to wrap up, to like build on what Benjamin and Deric said, I think one of the best compliments I've seen of the new show was on Twitter after this last episode airs. Like, this season really does feel like season 6 of Quantum Leap, because whereas season 5, it started building on, like, pushing the show more sci-fi, you started seeing more of the project, they took more chances with stories, and season 6 really seems like it's, like what you were just saying, like, you're taking the original nugget and you're expanding on what you can do with the story, and that really feels like what season 6 is doing. And I've said before in other episodes, like, if you all came on and basically you just did a retread of the original series with the same format, I frankly would have been bored by this point. But I love the fact that you're doing exactly what you said. Like, you're figuring out how you can build on the story and just keep pushing it further and further.
Yeah, no, that's a huge compliment. I didn't see that one. That's great. I mean, it's nice to know that there aren't any big seams that that are gaping and glaring between the two, that it does feel like one has sort of rolled into another, and that it is all just one big story. So that's really cool, and thank you for pointing that out.
No problem.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Next Generation a couple of times, and in some ways I almost feel like, as much as I love Next Generation, like, I would almost compare it more to Deep Space Nine, which is my favorite.
Yes.
Benjamin, Deric, thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun. Loved having you on, and really hope to do it again sometime.
Oh, thank you both. We would love
No,
to do
no,
it.
thank you. Thank you for taking the time. This is a lot of fun. It's great.
Yeah, and for keeping the torch burning.
Yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
absolutely.
Yeah, a little
I
way.
mean, hey, we're so happy to be able to have Quantum Leap back on the air and to have it, I don't want it to make this sound, petty at all, but to have it be good, that's the other thing. It's one thing to like get your show back. It's another thing to like get your show back and be like, yeah, it's back on. In this case, we get to be like, yeah, Quantum Leap's back on. Like, you should be watching the show. So,
well, you've been
thank
doing
you
this
guys. Thank you
You've
for
been
your
doing
work,
this.
and thank you.
You've been doing this podcast for 5 years. You said.
Yeah.
Has it been that long?
2017. Oh yeah.
Okay, so how did you guys get started doing that?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Dennis,
Your
you tell the
sure.
story.
Sure. So I'm the one of the hosts of the Quantum Leap podcast. They wrote this book, Beyond the Mirror Image, where they just compiled like all of the trivia that you could about the book. So so Sam was getting married because we had met doing theater a few years earlier. So I got him this as a wedding gift. I got him a proper wedding gift, but I gave him this one. And so as we were leaving the reception, I was like, hey, I got you something extra. So be sure to read this.
But he also said, don't open it until,
Don't open it. Yeah, because that'll ruin the honeymoon. Because that'll be it. And so a few weeks later, I pitched the idea of doing a podcast.
So then you decided to do a podcast
of the show.
Yeah, well, so it was.
And so it took us about 5 years to get through the show.
And how many times during the course of the podcast where they're almost like, hey, they're hearing a rumor that this show might be coming back. They might be, and they're like, come on, let's make this happen. And then nothing happens.
A couple rumors popped up, but really, like, I think we both reached a point of just like, it's never going to happen. It's not. Even when, and we had different opinions on this, but even when Scott Bakula was on Bob Saget's podcast last fall, and he said that there were like significant conversations happening, I was like, no, that's just Scott Bakula being polite because that's what he always says. It's not happening. And then like 3 months later,
and Deborah and Deborah had even put out there that like, serious conversations are happening right now, and I didn't want to get my hopes up, honestly. And at that particular point, we had kind of finished our original run, and we had almost a year or so in between where we were trying to figure out what we were going to be, because it's like, okay, we've talked about every episode. Yeah, we can talk about the novels and the comics a little bit, but we sort of just jumped around and talked about TV that we liked, and then of course, the announcement came, and I can say this now. I hesitated to say it at the time, but about 2 weeks after the announcement came, somebody sent me the original pilot script, and I was just sort of like, oh, okay, like this is really, really real, and now I have the script, and now what do we do? Like, somebody's giving us a little information, and it was just like, all right, let's just let's dive in and keep this going, and that's for the entirety of 2022. It really was just about talking about where they were going to go, where you guys were going to go, with the show, and what was going to happen, and then all of a sudden it was here, and it's been quite the journey, to say the least. To go from moving to Chicago, getting cast in a show that Dennis was directing, and seeing the Quantum Leap DVDs like on his bookshelf, and just being kind of like, oh, hey, you like that show? I like that show. And then, of course, he buys me the book, and I had genuinely been interested in doing a podcast, and a lot of it was just because I wanted an outlet to talk about my geeky, nerdy stuff, like comic books and television and movie, And when Dennis brought the idea of doing the Quantum Leap podcast, it's sort of like, all right, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And we're notorious, as you can obviously tell, for being fairly long-winded. So we have legitimately talked more about Quantum Leap than there is Quantum Leap to watch. So,
wow.
You couldn't even really use our episodes as audio commentary, because the episode would end and we'd still be talking for another 30 minutes. So, but yeah, we love it, and we feel very, very fortunate to be in a position to be talking about the show the way we get to talk about the show now.
And how did you choose Fate's Wide Wheel as the title? Whose idea was that?
That was me. So initially I thought to myself, if we're going to do this, who knows? We might come to a point where we finish Quantum Leap. What else are we going to do? If we call ourselves something that's too Quantum Leap specific, we'll have nowhere else to go, right? So if we call it Fate's Wide Wheel, while that is obviously Quantum Leap, it also gives us the opportunity to say like, hey, Fate's Wide Wheel, right? Like we can go anywhere we want, kind of just like the show can. And and we both were the type of nerds that had the Quantum Leap soundtrack and listened to it, driving around in our car, so we would hear that song from Glitter Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was popular in high school.
Oh yeah. So that's how we came to be.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, thank
It's a
you.
great
Carry
job.
this torch that long. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's amazing. This is why I never did a Happy Endings podcast, because I don't think I'd have the patience and time to try to carry the torch that long.
Yeah.
And like to talk about a show and really, they have that passion. That's fantastic. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Believing in it enough to will it back into existence.
Well,
I don't know that we had anything to do with it, but I will certainly, if we put it out there in the universe a few times. I will say, back to the question too about the revival. The first time I took it seriously was when Peacock was announced, because one of the murmurings is that they were going to bring, like, it's funny, they said that Quantum Leap would be one of the first shows on Peacock, and then it wasn't, which was weird because I was like, where's Quantum Leap? But at the same time, they were talking about the idea of potentially rebooting the series for Peacock as well. And I'm just so glad that I'd watch it if it was on Peacock. Obviously, I still, watch it afterwards on streaming sometimes. But just the fact that it is on NBC, that it is prime time, that, I feel like as much as television watching has changed, it still carries some weight. And to see the support that the network has, and just to see everything that we've gotten to see from the show, and people watching it live and feeling that kind of, as silly as this might sound, that energy on social media, during the live tweets and that sort of stuff is really cool. And seeing your guys' interaction on social media has always been fun and gratifying as well. So yeah, it's it'd be very easy for this to just devolve into a love fest and talk about, all the wonderful stuff that's happened and how happy we are that you guys are involved in doing what you do. But it's true. It's very, very true, because I think the show represents so much. And those 4 H's that you said that Deborah mentioned, to the room, I think is absolutely true. And it's the reason why we've stuck with it, because the show meant so much to us as youngsters. And the truth is that, Sam Beckett, the character of Sam Beckett, really was someone worth idolizing in a way, and the message of the show and the themes of the show were important. And I think especially, seeing those situations that he was in and seeing the journeys that he went on and how they reflected a world that might not always reflect the world that we were living in, but more often than not reflected a world that was a cautionary tale, maybe don't do this, or reflected a world that we would like to see, I think was incredibly important. And to now see this current show carry on that torch as well, exactly how you guys were talking about, especially with, the intent and the thoughtfulness that goes into the way that representation matters to the show, I think is incredibly important. And hopefully it's something that there are, there's a 12 or 13-year-old out there watching the show, getting what we got, from the show 30 years ago. So yeah.
Well, Benjamin, Derek, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sam, Dennis. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right,
guys,
it was a lot of fun. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. You too.
We'll talk soon.
See you again.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.